Hello, so in this video, I'm going to talk about whether it's okay to see more than one therapist at the same time. So stay tuned. Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. I'm a therapist who's been in practice for over 25 years, working with thousands of patients. And so in this series, I'm talking a little bit about common things that are good for patients to know in therapy, but things that we don't necessarily have a big discussion about until they kind of come up or we indirectly reference them in terms of what we therapists do in terms of influencing the pattern of how we're interacting with our patient, right? So I made this video recently, and the video is about what to expect in your first session of therapy. And I'll put a link up here at the top if you want to go watch that one. But then I thought about making this series, which is Things Your Therapist Doesn't Tell You, because there are very, very common issues that impact the quality of services that patients get and have to do with the nature of the process and the relationship with the therapist. And they could be things that we decided to cover early on in the process to help patients be well informed. The problem is a resource issue, which is time, because I'm making this series of videos about this variety of topics in this particular domain of interest. And if I did this same discussion with every new patient, the initial intake appointment would have to be 3 hours long, right? So this is why we therapists don't say these things. Somebody made a silly comment on the first video in this series. We're not saying something because we're not wanting to scare people off. We want to make money by malingering with clients. Absolutely not true. The reason we don't say certain things is because it would encumber us with a diversion into a topic that may not seem so relevant to the substance of what a patient comes to therapy to get, right? However, I'm making these videos because there is some importance for many people in many of the therapeutic relationships to understand these things, right? So this series is stuff we don't tell you, but we could, and that it kind of comes out here and there in the therapy process. But why not just laser in straight to the point and discuss the actual topic? So in this video, I'm going to talk about, is it okay to see more than one therapist at the same time, right? And by the way, if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below. If you have yet to subscribe to the video, subscribe, and just know that I'm not sponsored by anybody. But if you would like to know about how to work with me through an online course that I offer, just go to the description below and you'll find a link for my stress reduction mastery course, which is a 2-week course to teach you easy to learn, easy to practice techniques that'll start lowering your stress today. And they're absolutely guaranteed to work, because if you take the course and they don't work for you, I'll just give you your money back. No questions asked. So it's 100% guaranteed to lower your stress. So anyway, if you want to find out more information about that course, check the link in the description below. It's just courses.johnpeters.online/stress reduction mastery. So in any case, let me get back to the topic here in this video. Sometimes people have the inclination to see more than one therapist at the same time, or actually do and then feel weird about it. So here's my 2 cents worth on whether it's okay to see more than one therapist at the same time. The most common time I think that people do this or think about doing it is when they are initiating the therapy process. And so sometimes people are going to start therapy, they're not seeing a therapist, or they've seen one before and they're going to restart the process. And so sometimes, people reasonably want to find somebody who fits well. And as you know, we're not all clones of each other. So each of us is very different from the next in terms of what you can get out of us. and what our style is. And so it's the short answer is it's absolutely reasonable to schedule 2 or more initial sessions with therapists that you haven't seen before in order to get a sense of whether the providers in particular as individuals seem to be people that you would want to work with and that can help you meet your goals, right? Absolutely okay. Now, what we discourage is seeing more than one person for an ongoing process at the same time, right? And the reasons for that, the main reason is that it's going to get confusing because, being involved in a therapy relationship involves a commitment in regular meetings, so some time. There's money involved, so the cost is an issue for a lot of people. And then once you are involved with a therapy process, you 99.9% of the time, what's going on in the therapy happens in the sessions, but also out of the sessions. So if you think about one therapy process, you're going to see someone, let's say, once a week, but then that process is going to affect you outside of those sessions. You may have homework or things that you do related to supporting the process outside of the sessions. And every additional therapist you might add to the process is just going to encumber you with more of that type of commitment and focus and time. And it potentially could be confusing because if you had therapist A pointing in one direction, therapist B leading you in another direction, then you might have a confusing process in terms of how to make sense of it. So in general, even though it's okay to see more than one therapist for an exploratory type of thing to find out who you want to work with, it's really not a good idea to have 2 therapists simultaneously working on your issues with you because of those reasons. Now, I will say that sometimes a person who's involved in a long-term therapy relationship with a therapist has a special need and will have a temporary addition or diversion to a specialist who can offer them something special. And I'll give you an example of that. One of my areas of expertise is working with issues of divorce. And it has happened in the past that someone who's in therapy calls me up and says, "Look, John, I don't really want you to be my general therapist, but I'm going through a divorce and I have some focused questions and some focused needs related to that. And I'd like to meet with you for a few sessions to talk about how to cope with these challenges that I'm experiencing in the divorce." So I end up being this temporary specialist who's an add-on to their general therapy process. And they use me for that and then fire me reasonably and go back to their original therapy process. So sometimes you add another therapist as a temporary add-on to whatever you've got going on with your main therapy relationship with your regular therapist, and that's okay too. But again, that has enough clarity in terms of the distinct focus and goals related to the general focus and goals that you might be doing in your other therapy, and that's no big deal at all. The other thing that people sometimes do, which is related, is if you've been seeing a therapist for a while and you are kind of getting to the point where you think you've gotten what you're going to get out of that particular provider in that process, or you're wondering if you need something different, sometimes people will do an exploratory initial session with one or more other therapists to kind of interview them just to see would they want to stop with their current therapist and switch and start working with a new therapist to get something different. That's okay too. But again, we don't necessarily want people doing multiple therapists and encumbering themselves with lots of confused focus and too much work and potentially too much expense as well. And related to the expense, another thing to consider is that if you are getting your therapy services reimbursed via an insurance policy, um, in general, this is not advice about what your particular policy is going to say about this, but just in general, what I observe is that insurance policies don't tend to get too bent out of shape about, claims getting submitted by more than one provider for a similar type of service. But if you were to see two providers for the same type of service in an ongoing way, like see two therapists and they're both submitting claims to your insurance for the exact same billing code for the same type of service, it could result in that getting flagged for review, where your insurance company either stops paying those claims until they review it, or they look into it to see why are you seeing more than one person for the same thing, basically. Because in general, they want to pay for the one thing that you need and not multiples of the same thing. And so they've got an interest in controlling that. You could end up in that kind of situation if you had an ongoing kind of repeated submission of the same types of claims from multiple providers. In the short term, I haven't seen that be an issue when people do it a limited number of times. I think that likely would be an issue if you were going to do it in an ongoing way, right? So that's my 2 cents worth about, is it okay to see more than one therapist? And of course, before I end, let me say one other scenario. If you are a person dealing with relationship issues or family issues, it's often actually prescribed by us practitioners to have people see individual therapists as individuals, but then together as a couple or a family to see a couples therapist or a family therapist for the joint sessions that includes more than one of you, right? That's totally fine. That's not going to confuse the process. In fact, it's more likely to confuse the process if you use the same therapist for your individual therapy for each of you, let's say in a couple, and for your couples therapy together. We don't tend to advise that because that runs into problematic boundary issues and alliance issues, right? So I may make a specialized video on that topic as well. I mentioned that issue when that video that I mentioned in the first part of this one about what to expect in your first session. I talk a little bit about that issue as well. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. Thanks for joining me today. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next part of this series.